Myanmar was once the largest exporter of rice, and rice remains the country's most crucial agriculture commodity. 10 years ago, in early May, cyclone Nargis caused the worst natural disaster in the recorded history of Myanmar. In the aftermath of the flood, Tzu Chi volunteers from Malaysia and Thailand overcame many obstacles to enter Myanmar to assess damage. In Yangon of Myanmar, one can see the beautiful streets, a large number of temples, and British-style buildings. It was once the most magnificent city in Southeast Asia before World War II. Moreover, Myanmar was once the world's top rice exporter. In British writer George Orwell's novel Burmese Days, there was a description of the flood. In February to May of every year, the seasonal wind blows westward, followed by heavy rains that flooded everything. "80 years later, in May of 2008, Cyclone Nargis brought non-stop rain and flooded Irrawaddy Delta, devastating parts of the country. Back then, Time magazine and economists have both reported on the devastation of Myanmar. In the reports, it was mentioned that the Burmese junta would not open up and allow foreign aid to reach survivors of Cyclone Nargis. A week later, on May 8th, the first batch of UN aid supplies were allowed to enter the country, but not the foreign media and aid organizations. On May 10th, the first NGO that was granted permission to enter Myanmar to assess damage was Taiwan's NGO Tzu Chi Foundation. The 9-people disaster assessment team formed by Tzu Chi volunteers in Malaysia and Thailand has started Tzu Chi's charity work in Myanmar. For 10 years, Tzu Chi has taken root in Myanmar, witnessing how the Burmese government became democratic. What is remarkable is how the junta government had granted Tzu Chi the first permit to enter the country.
Before our permit was granted, I felt terrible. The master had said that a lot of Tzu Chi volunteers were on their way to help the disaster victims, but the government would not allow us to do it. I heard the master cried because of it. Upon learning of the news, I felt terrible. I did all I could, asking for help.
Despite the difficulties, the volunteers still carried out their charity work. Finally, the government extended the permit from 1 day to a month to a permanent one.
Now, if the government officials ask us who granted us the permission to carry out charity work here, we'd show them this permit. Once they see the permit, they would understand. This permit is really too important.
When Taiwan's Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation Master Zheng Yan's team explained to me about their work, they said they are compassionate and vegetarian. I've seen what they have done and I believe them. Therefore, I granted them the permits.
In the aftermath of the disaster, when many NGOs started to leave Myanmar, Tzu Chi Foundation began to carry out further charity work in the country.
As the master helps Myanmar, she does a thorough job. The master has taught me that we not only have a start and end, but the work in between. I've remembered her words. I told our high-level government officials in Myanmar that the master carries out a thorough job. We're happy that Tzu Chi has carried out charity work in Myanmar. Now I think about Tzu Chi all the time. I will help out whenever I'm asked to do so.
Starting from scratch, Tzu Chi volunteers have taken root in Myanmar. 10 years later, there are currently about 400 local volunteers and more than 1,000 Tzu Chi's donating members. The seeds of love planted by Tzu Chi volunteers in Myanmar have sprouted and taken root in the country.